the ecosystem that breaks foremen. Join passionate automotive trainer and coach Andrew Uglow as he unpacks the CAMPS framework, customers, advisors, managers, parts and sales, and reveals how these so-called time vampires quietly pull foremen away from the work they are actually responsible for. In this episode, you'll learn why most foremen burnout is not a personal failure, how urgency drags good people off their mark, and why the foreman and service manager must work as a pair to protect time, boundaries, and performance. Discover how to spot the systematic pressures that keep foremen firefighting and understand why the skill that got someone promoted is not always the skill that makes them effective in the role. Along the way, you'll hear why leadership, not just management, is the missing link in fixing the people gap inside the workshop. I'm your co-host Anthony Perl, and this is the Frictionless Workshop podcast. Let's get cranking.
Andrew, I think we've got to tackle this whole issue of the ecosystem that breaks foremen, because we've been skirting around the edges we've talked in previous episodes about capability and about measuring. But at the end of the day, what is this ecosystem that is really going to cause the big issues?
Yeah, so I call this CAMPS, C-A-M-P-S, CAMPS, which stands for customers, advisors, managers, parts and sales. And I call them time vampires. And I mean this in the nicest way. Nothing malicious. I'm sure the people that work in the business are great people. I'm sure they mean well. They're trying to get their job done without question. And at the same time, these are all the things that mystically absorb the foreman's time, in addition to all of the other responsibilities that the foreman has. And so I don't want to turn this into a whinge about, the parts department, the service advisors, this and that. This is about a systemic issue that exists. And if we can't call it out, well, how can we possibly make steps towards addressing it? So yeah, CAMPS. It's the pieces that are the time black hole. I just spent 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour solving someone else's problem, and I didn't get my responsibilities done. And so as a foreman, I keep getting dragged off my mark. I keep getting pushed off my spot. It's like being in the ocean in waist deep water, and you're getting pushed around as the currents and the tide move. And you're supposed to be doing these things, and you're not. You're doing those things. And for foremen, it's really frustrating. It's a big contributor to foreman burnout. And it's also a really big contributor for some of the really negative internal dialogue that I know that foremen run, because they look at their performance and they go, well, I should be able to do this and I should be able to do that and I should have done this and I should have done that. And they should all over themselves. But at the end of the day, they were never taught how to manage this. They weren't given structures, strategies, methodologies, tactics for dealing with the CAMPS, the customers, advisors, managers, parts and sales teams that absorb their time. And it's not that those people are evil. They're not. They're trying to get their job done. But we're out of balance. And so I go back to, this is a systemic issue, not a personal issue.
It begs the question then, with all of this stuff, is how do you actually address this in a meaningful way and pull it apart? Because I think one of the issues that happens in all kinds of workplaces all the time, and particularly on ones of the scale that we're talking about, is there's this notion that everything is urgent. And so how do you fit that into this landscape?
It's funny, I was listening to a business psychologist, and they were talking about how the human brain is wired to respond to urgency. It comes out of our primal part of the brain, fight, flight, freeze, something, when there's a large animal about to eat me, well, that's somewhat urgent. Sure, it's important that I tuck my kids in at bed, but that's not urgent at this point. So we respond neurologically to this. And so I go back to, if we're going to resolve this issue, step one is awareness. If we don't have, firstly, even general awareness, but better if we can have some really specific awareness around what's actually happening, it's going to be really challenging to put in place the parts that need to be there to resolve this. And let me just put on my realism hat and just go, I'm not sure that you ever will solve it. What I believe you can do is you can mitigate it. You can stop it from stealing as much of your time as a foreman that it currently does. And so this comes back if we go, okay, so there's a problem here. Foreman's getting pushed from pillar to post. They're getting pushed off their mark. They should be doing these things. They're now doing those things. We need them to do those things because no one else can do those things. So we don't have another solution for that. So one of the challenges has been that we just keep responding out of this urgency, and we don't pause and step back and go, oh, well, hang on a minute. Let's take a little bit of a meta view. Let's do a helicopter view and find out what's the driver behind that? What's the driver behind that? What's the driver behind that? And I go, this is the foreman's job. Sure, the service manager owns this because this foreman reports to the service manager. And there are parts around good systems, good processes. There are parts where the service manager has to have a discussion with the sales manager or the parts manager or whoever it is and say, hey, look, want to help you, and can we do this because it's going to work better for me than it is what's happening now, and you'll get your stuff done as well. And so good systems and good processes, and sometimes there needs to be some good discussions. Sometimes, and certainly this has been my experience, some people that do work in those parts of the business maybe shouldn't be working in those parts of the business. Lovely people and all, but just not suited to that role, or not skilled in that role, or not suited for the industry. And so I'm sure you appreciate what I mean when I say that, and have them work for someone else rather than you. Those big pieces, those big chunks, sure, they exist. Got to address that. But at the foreman level, the foreman needs a way to, and we spoke about this before, how to maintain boundaries. So when someone comes to me and says, Andrew, I need you to da-da-da-da-da, okay, no problems. But I've got all this other work. Which one of these am I going to drop in order to do that? Because I can't do both. And that's a tough conversation to have because everything's urgent. You know, do you want me to stop work on Mrs. McGillicuddy's car so I can work on Mr. Smythe's car? Because I can't do both. But the challenge is that foremen come out of this world where when the pressure's on, they've got this really good work ethic. Generally speaking, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. And the pressure's on, fine, I go harder, just try me, let me show you what I can do. And they do. They're very resourceful, very effective, this is why they're foremen, right? They're foremen because they're good at what they do. But that doesn't work in the role of foreman. The skill that got you to foreman isn't the skill that makes you successful as a foreman. And no one seems to have explained that to foremen or service managers even, for that matter.
Speaking of service managers then, where do they fit into the equation of this?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the word privilege to work for a high capability foreman and an exceptional service manager. They manage this as a pair. This is a two-person challenge, right? So one of the things that I saw them do was they put in place processes for certain types of things. So if there was a parts issue that needed the foreman's attention, well, okay, that comes to the service manager first. The service manager then does the triage and goes, yeah, we'll get to that tomorrow, or we'll address it now, or I'll have a technician come and do that for you, or one of my service team will address it. So that the service manager becomes the filter for most of these things. So when sales go, oh, we've got a car that's supposed to go out and pre-delivery didn't do this, or they didn't do that, or the battery's gone flat and I need it done now and the customer's on the way and we're all going to die. Sure, okay, we can address the urgent that are the urgent, but don't just stop at that. Like, go and put in place a process so that doesn't happen. And usually the reason that the foreman's the fixer is because there is a cascade of things that have gone wrong and they just end up being the bunny. And if they don't have the skill of maintaining boundaries and having, I'll call them effective conversations, they might be a bit challenging, but effective conversations and going, well, hey, here's the reality of my world. I still have these responsibilities, even though this has occurred for you. How are we going to make this work? Because there's usually a way. And look, sometimes it does mean that the foreman doubles down or stays late, or there's overtime, or there's these other things. But just having everything get dropped on the foreman's desk is profoundly ineffective, and I'm going to argue harmful.
The Frictionless Workshop podcast is brought to you by Solutions Culture. For details on how to get in touch with Andrew, consult the show notes below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the podcast.
What's interesting too here is that it kind of points out to this issue that we've talked about in previous episodes, where just because you're the best at the job doesn't mean that you should be the person that is next batter up to be the foreman. Because the negative of that as well is you can be taking your best technician off the floor, and in this kind of situation can be proving that they've got the ability to fix the problems. So just maybe if they were there fixing the problems all the time and not being the foreman, we wouldn't have the problems in the first place.
Yeah. So do I have permission just to be out and out honest here? And I'm not going to be rude, but I want to call a spade, because if we don't get awareness, like, how can you fix anything? So is that all right?
Your show. You've got to have the honest. We've got to be honest, don't we? But you're right. You're 100% right. And I think people should be nodding their heads when they're listening here.
So if you want to track this back to cause and effect, and there's layers and levels of cause and effect, this is a systemic failure, and this is a systemic failure at a leadership level. So this starts with the dealer principle. And dealer principles, if you're listening, please, I'm not throwing you under the bus. I recognize the difficulty and complexity that you deal with. And at the same time, given the reports, and we're going to talk about this in another episode, given all the reports and the pressure and tension on margin and all these sorts of things, this is the perfect time to go and solve the leadership issue. And the leadership issue starts with you, but it cascades down. And there is a vacuum of leadership. We're pretty good at management, generally speaking, in automotive, but there is a vacuum of leadership, and the two are not the same. Leadership looks after the person as much as they look after the numbers. And the consequence of looking after the person is you look after the numbers. You just do, because people produce numbers. The numbers don't just magically occur by themselves. Sure, you need systems, technology, all those pieces, got to have, sure. But it's the person who's delivering the outcomes. And so start with the person. Don't start with the system and throw the person at it. Start with the person. It matters. And when we talk about starting with the person, everybody needs reward, recognition, and resource. If they don't have the resources, how can they possibly perform? And the difference between retention and departure are those three things: recognition, reward, resource. It's not hard. Other industries can manage it. In fact, other industries do brilliantly, because they don't get stuck in this obsessive, compulsive, monthly, urgent cycle of hit my numbers. If I manage my people well, if I lead my people well, if I install leaders, if leadership's not my strength, no problems. Find someone who has that and install them in the business, and then let them continue to install leaders. Because if my foreman has a great manager, then I'll have a great foreman. And if I've got a great foreman, I'll have a great technical team, because the foreman produces a great technical team. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens, because that's what great foremen do. And if I've got a great technical team, how can I not hit the numbers? How can I not maintain and retain my people? Maintain my skill and retain my people. This is cascade up and down. We know this. This is not new. 80-20. I know 20% of the industry are doing it really, really well. And this shows in Deloitte's figures. If you're across the latest industry Deloitte report, you'll see it there. And the ones that aren't, arguably it's 70-30, but let's call it 80-20 because we love Pareto. The ones that aren't are the ones that struggle. They're the ones that are really feeling the pain. And Deloitte came out and said this, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. But Deloitte came out and said this is a people problem. As much as it is a numbers and a financial problem, it's a people problem. So, yeah, get it done.
It's interesting to me when you look at some of the things that you've been saying there, particularly in regards to the best people, because it's the best people for the team, isn't it? I mean, I think sometimes it's not always the top people in every single position that are going to make you work well. I mean, you look at that in a football team. Often the football teams that get amazing results are the ones that work as a team. There might only be one or two out and out superstars, but it's the team mentality that goes well. Whereas sometimes, if you look at international teams and you put the best of everybody in the best positions, there's too many people fighting for control and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Jim Collins, I forget the name of his book. He talks about getting the right people on the bus. So the right people on the bus in the right seats, and it matters. And so maybe your service manager might be a great manager. You need leadership across your service and parts. You don't need more management. You need more leadership, because leadership plays from a human element as much as they play from the business. They don't ignore the business. It's not one or the other. It's parallel. And the gap is the people gap. And that's what's hurting. That's what's showing up in the financial figures.
So just to wrap up this episode, give us a tip for what they can do. What is the one lever that they should be pulling in this particular scenario?
So for foremen, my response would be to maintain your boundaries and to do it respectfully, because the person that's asking me to do this, they're trying to get stuff done. They've been put in a tight spot too. So do it with empathy, right? Don't do it. Don't throw them under the bus, okay? Because you've got to work together. And where you can, bit of give, bit of take. But that question that I mentioned earlier, okay, if I do this for you, what can you do for me? Or how can you help me get my things done? Because there might be something. Now, obviously, if it's diagnosed a deep, complex, compound technical issue, perhaps asking the parts guy to do that is a bad idea. But there might be something else that the parts guy could do that could speed up another part of the system or the business. Hey, look, could you da-da-da-da-da for me? Because that now takes the time that I was going to spend here away. That solves that problem for me. So start to think a bit more strategically, but also ask that question too of particularly when it comes down from the top. Hey, Andrew, I need you to go and do this. No problemo. Which one of these do you want to have held up while I do that? Because that gets the thinking out of the urgent panic, we're all going to die, into a more strategic stream. And when you start to be more strategic, you can actually avoid the potholes before you hit them.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode, but if you realise today that your foreman is being dragged off their mark by customers, advisors, managers, parts and sales, it is time to stop treating that as a personality problem, and as Andrew says, start treating it as a system problem. The next step is to look at where urgency is stealing time, where boundaries are missing, and where the service manager needs to become the filter rather than letting every problem land on the foreman's desk. A workbook has been created to accompany this episode of the podcast. It's got questions for you to answer, key quotes from the episode, and action steps to take. You can download your copy from the link in the show notes. Lots of information in there as well on how to get in touch with Andrew and his team at Solutions Culture. Make sure you share this with your service manager as well, but whatever you do, don't miss our next episode, because Andrew will be unpacking how to install foreman effectiveness without tanking the month. He gets into why sending a foreman off to a 2-day training course can actually compound the problem, and why coaching may be the missing bridge between knowing there is a capability gap and actually closing it. If you want to build foremen who can perform without blowing up productivity, you can't afford to miss the episode. If you found value in today's episode, wherever you're tuning in, please like, share, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep your workshop running smooth and frictionless.